I am ranked number one. One! That means I'm the best.
Yeah. So Bill Cayton was born in 1918. He died in 2003, 85 years of age. Cayton was a millionaire before he was 30 through advertising. He made his money through advertising. A millionaire of 30. Very impressive. Very impressive. This was in the 40s. He teamed up with Jim Jacobs, and they established the Big Fights Inc. Incorporated. They had 17,000 fights dating back to the 18th century. They struck a deal with a TV network, and they sold the Greatest Fights of the Century series in the late 40s. Jacobs and Cayton went on to manage Wilfred Benitez, who became WBA light welterweight champion, and Edwin Rosario, who himself was a two-time lightweight champion. Two Puerto Rican fighters, both based in New York. There was a lot of Puerto Rican fighters, good ones as well, based in New York in the 80s. You know, Rosario, Benitez, Camacho, Laporte, and the great Wilfredo Gomez. Back to Cayton and Jacobs. Whilst managing Benitez, they did bring in Customato, who tried to get Benitez to be a bit more aggressive, as a lot of his performances were derided by the press for being too cautious, but Benitez wasn't going to bite the bullet on that. A little digression for those who didn't know that. Tyson was closer to Jim Jacobs and Customato than he was Bill Cayton. Now, this wasn't really noticeable when all three were still alive. Cus died just before, a little way before Tyson won the title from Burbeck. And Jacobs, he died shortly before Tyson took on Spinks. After Tyson defeated Spinks, he served Cayton, aka Satan, dubbed by Don King, his marching orders and served him his papers that, it's over. In 89, he also sued Cayton for loss of earnings and what would amount to theft, I would guess. Cayton produced documents, and the paper trail suggested that he didn't rob Mike Tyson. Cayton was still technically Tyson's manager until 92 on paper, but there was no interaction, and I guess he was just collecting dough from Mike Tyson's substantial purses. Cayton wrote a letter to Mike Tyson in 89 and said, "What does it take to make you wake up?" Cayton accuses King of losing Mike between $50 million in endorsements and TV commercials between the title loss to Douglas till when his managerial contract ran out with Tyson legally. He accused King of rushing Mike into a Douglas rematch without the proper medical examinations, although a Douglas rematch never manifested. Cayton, like I say, was still in a managerial capacity to the champ, the former champ. He wanted Tyson, after the Douglas defeat, to take on Alex Stewart, who Tyson eventually went on to defeat. Take on Alex Stewart, then Ronaldo Snipes, and then in early 91, he would take on the winner of Holyfield versus Douglas. Tyson, unimpressed by Cayton's letter, suggesting that he didn't know what he was doing, said, not verbatim, but paraphrasing, he was insulted and suggested that their relationship was more of a slave and slave master relationship rather than a mutual thriving business partnership. Tyson said, as if I would run back with my tail between my legs, In Don King's elimination tournament, Tyson took on Trevor Burbick and he took him out. He outpointed Bone Crusher Smith. I believe he defended against Pinklon Thomas, no Boxer Cup at the moment, and then he outpointed Tony Tucker in 87 to become unified champion, still 21 years of age. Cayton and Jacobs were reluctant of entering the tournament because they didn't want no dealings with Don King. None at all. They didn't want to deal with Don. They didn't want to deal with Bob Arum. And for some reason, Butch Lewis, who didn't enter the tournament with Michael Spinks. So that didn't make sense what Cayton was saying. But Don King, as a promoter, was a force of nature and practically had every top 10 ranked heavyweight under his wing. Nevertheless, Cayton and Jacobs were determined to break the monopoly, so they were strategizing that Tyson could, like Spinks, avoid the heavyweight tournament and take on Larry Holmes, non-title fight, and then Jerry Cooney in massive money spinners. And then he would take on the winner of the tournament, all of which would prevent them being tied up with Don King for any lengthy periods. Nevertheless, they entered the tournament. They entered when the negotiations with Holmes went pear-shaped, as we say in the UK. They offered Holmes $1 million and $200,000 for training and expenses, and a $1 million purse. Holmes agreed at first, and he came back and said he wanted $3 million and at least $100,000 more for training and expenses. So they said no. Obviously, he doesn't want to fight Mike, and he's pricing himself out. Tyson won the tournament, as I've stated already, and unless you've been in a cave and you're a boxing fan, you would know that too. HBO offered Cayton an extension after the tournament, which would guarantee him $2 million per fight in a 6-fight deal, with Don King promoting all the fights. Cayton said no. He was getting offers from Bob Arum, Dan Duva, Josephine Abercrombie. Not that he wouldn't work with King, but he didn't want to tie himself to King. That's one thing he didn't want to do. So after the tournament is over, Tyson outpointed Tony Tucker. He took on Tyrrell Biggs, who was promoted by Dan Duva, Lou Duva, George Benton, the trainer, as a lot of the 84 American Olympic squad was. Pernell Whitaker, Biggs, Meldrick Taylor. So they went from the Biggs defense, working with the Duvas, and then they took on Larry Holmes, who was promoted by Don King. Well, King actually offered Larry $3 million to come back, and Larry took it. So Larry did eventually get the money that he wanted in the first place for taking on Tyson. And who can blame him? You know what I mean? Why is an aging champion just retired gonna take on Mike Tyson for chump change, basically? Why would he? Larry did the right thing. He did the right thing. And he got stretched out in 4. So you want to get compensated properly when you're taking blows from Mike Tyson. Then you also had the period of 88 where he hooked up with Robin Givens, who faked a pregnancy, on some gold digging shit. He didn't know who to trust, I don't believe. Mike often said that Don King would say, yo, the world is against us, the black man, and we're going to stick together, Mike, and, white devils and all that. And, Mike was a little naive and gullible, and, that worked. That was just enough to tip the balance for Don. Robin Givens, who saw how close Steve was to Mike, and Steve Lott, and how much respect that Mike had for Steve, and likewise, Steve basically used to do everything for Mike. She knew she had to get rid of Steve. Robin got into Mike's head, and Steve was fired. Steve Lott was the last line of defense before Don King and Robbie Givens could totally get their claws into Mike and devour the man who was dubbed the baddest man on the planet. Bill Cayton claims that Don King actually bragged to him about poisoning Mike's mind against him. It's believed that while Tyson was in jail, he signed a multi-million-dollar contract with Don King. I think he got about $25 million for the Peter McNeely fight, and he was earning some big purses, it seemed. But, King was accused of a lot of things, like starting a Mike Tyson fan club. Apparently, one of Don King's daughters was supposed to be running that. And that was just a minor expense. When I say minor, it was about $50,000 a year over a period of years. But it all totals up. In 1998, Tyson sued Don King for various misdealings and infringements. Like in negotiating with Showtime, Don King was using Tyson's name to negotiate millions and millions of dollars worth of fights and not breaking Mike off none of the money. Tyson didn't have no promoter's license or anything like that. I think Don even negotiated a Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. fight with Tyson's name, which you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to do these things. These are illegal practices. Tyson knew Don was skimming a little off the surface, but when he was warned at what extent Don was taken out of his purses, then he acted. Tyson's money was funding Don paying for rent and renovations for some of the corporate and personal residences owned by Don King. Mike was spending money himself very frivolously. BMWs, loads of them, 10 at a time, Rolls Royces, Bentleys, mansions, which he was able to finance as long as the $30 million paydays kept coming. But when he was suspended after the Holyfield biting incident, that ended the paydays, and Tyson had time to fall back and see what was happening, and then he was ready to break ties with King. Don also seems to have messed up Tyson's contract with the WWF. King demanded $300,000 for the rights for anybody using Mike Tyson's likeness. But Marn told Tyson about the $300,000. Tyson wasn't too pissed off about that, but Marn used to make action figures for the wrestlers, and he wanted to do that with Tyson. And that was a big marketing venture, them action figures. But Mike couldn't get that done without going through Don, because Don had secured the rights to Mike's likeness. Cayton knew that he wasn't going to win his bid to remain Tyson's manager. They, however, reduced his percentages of Mike's purses from 33% to 20% up until 1992 is what I'm figuring. Cayton claims he would have, at the minimum, made Tyson $50 million more than what he earned with King. That's the minimum between 88 and 92. For one, Bruno was always going to be a potential fight from when Cus D'Amato was around. I think they even met each other. I'm not sure if they sparred. And I think Cus said, one day you two are going to fight. Now, they did fight in America. And according to Cayton, it wasn't one of Tyson's biggest events, because nobody knew Frank Bruno in America. But if the fight had took place in England with Mickey Duff and Jarvis Astaire at the helm, it would have been beautiful. But that couldn't happen when Don King got involved, because Duff and Astaire apparently weren't going to do business with Don King. He would have took it up to at least $3 to $4 million more if the fight had took place in London, which is a lot of money back then. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. Let's not forget when Tyson was with Cayton and Jacobs, he had numerous endorsements, Pepsi being one of the main ones, Kodak, Nintendo being some of the other blue chip companies his name was aligned with. King allowed Aaron Snowell to train Mike Tyson in the debacle in Japan when he lost his title, where they didn't have the ends well. Then after that, they brought in Richard Giachetti, who used to say that before he met Tyson, used to say Cus D'Amato was a fraud. He rejected all the teachings that Cus taught Mike. So it wasn't a great fit for him. This is all alleged by Cayton. When Cayton was accused of thieving Mike's money and it went to court, they had to rehash the year of 1987 where, Tyson spent crazy money, man. There was money settled out of court for an assault on a car park supervisor, massive limousine bills. Tyson would rather take a limousine than drive one of his cars from New York City to Catskill, New York. Stuff like that. Luxury cars. There was a fat tax bill that ran up a lot of money. Eventually Cayton went his own way and Mike went his own way, and he went on to say that King used to say only in America, but Cayton said the truth is only in America could Don King get away with what he got away with. He said he got away with a lot of it because he's black and he could get away with that, which I don't understand. blacks have not typically got away with more crimes than whites in America. And I think, you could just take a look at American history to see why that wouldn't make sense. But King was heavily politically connected and still is, and is a very powerful man, a formidable opponent for anyone to take on in the boxing, promotion and business arena. He made his money through the numbers racket until a manslaughter charge where one of the punters, I guess you'd call them, didn't pay out one of their debts, and King took the man's life. King's conviction was reduced to non-negligent manslaughter, and he only did 4 years in the pen. He was later pardoned in 1983 with letters in support from Jesse Jackson, Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King's wife, George Voinovich, Art Modell, and Gabe Paul, amongst others who supported his bid for a pardon. Tyson ducked Lennox Lewis and gave up the WBC belt he won from Frank Bruno in '96. He gave up the belt. Oliver McCall and Lennox Lewis fought for the vacant WBC belt. Tyson went on to take on Bruce Seldon in Las Vegas the same night Tupac got shot. Took that belt, then eventually fought Evander Holyfield. A lot of people say that when Tyson was under Jacobs, Cayton, Costomato, there's no challenge that wouldn't have been fought, and Don King reduced him into a bit of a mercenary, let's say. By the time he fought Lennox post-millennium, it was purely a financial decision, not a pugilistic endeavour by any means. He was just paying off debts. Mike Tyson and Don King settled out of court, $14 million. It's the sum they're saying Tyson got. He sued him for $100 million. It wouldn't shock me if most of Mike's settlement went back out to pay off debts again. That's just Mike's history of money. And these are just some of the politics that Mike went through in his career, man. Tyson declared bankruptcy in 2003 with debts of over $27 million.